Everyone wants what's on the other side, the success, the purpose, the blessing, but very few are willing to surrender who they were to become who God is calling them to be. This is Reignite. Stories forged through fire, men and women rebuilt through obedience, and the truth about what it actually costs to become. Because purpose is not found in comfort, it is forged in refinement. And on the other side of surrender is the life God intended all along. Welcome to Reignite. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, I have a super exciting guest, Julie Lyles Carr. Thank you so much for being a part of this. You are actually my first ever woman to have on my show, and I'm incredibly honored that you were able to take the time to do this with me. You are an author, a speaker. You've had time in ministry. You're a mom of 8, which is incredible. I just want to be able to get into your story, figure out what God has done in your life, what you've learned from him about his character through your story, what you've learned as a mom, what you've learned as a wife. Let's just dive right in. You've done so many different things in your life, and I just kind of want to see, like, what did you initially, like when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I love that. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. You just have such a beautiful platform that you've built that has been curated, and it's just such a delight to be here. So thank you. And I'm so honored to be your first female guest. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. I love this question about what I wanted to be when I was a kid, because at Sunnydale Elementary School in Lancaster, California, just north of Los Angeles, I had an assignment a couple of years in a row, and I've actually run across it in all of the documents from my school days. And it was this little form where you would put a baby picture on there, and you'd put what your favorite books were and your favorite hobbies and what you wanted to be when you grew up. And so that was absolutely on there. And it was so fun to go back and review what 4th grade Julie, what 5th grade Julie thought life might be like, what she might want to do when she grew up. And it's so funny because even at that age, I was still very true to what I am today, which was kind of this Swiss Army knife, because I said that I wanted to deliver babies and write books and teach stuff and be a musician of some sort. And so all of those things actually came to fruition, probably not exactly in the way that 4th and 5th grade Jules thought that they might, but in many ways, those things did happen, including delivering some of my own kids. So, I think that that's one of those things that you're like, oh, okay, well, actually, we can check that one off. Not exactly,
That is crazy.
Opening a medical practice, delivering babies, but did the things still.
Okay. That's amazing. Well, I have to also mention the fact that, like, all of those things happened. There is research in that, like, I think Jordan Peterson did this experiment where, because he was a college professor before he became what he is today. And he did this experiment with his graduate students where they, wrote down what exactly they wanted their life to look like. And the percentage of people who actually brought that to fruition after writing it down was just, like, astonishing compared to people who don't write that down. Like, writing down, there's something that happens when you write things down. It's something I tell my clients all the time, and I do myself. Writing down creates neural pathways in your brain that just are really, they stay.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we always need to be cognizant about as well, when we do write some things down and then we think, well, I don't know if I really accomplished that, because my original intent in writing it down this way was this other thing. But one thing that I do love about having that ability to go back and look at this, like I said, maybe it didn't all exactly work out how I would have envisioned back in the day. I was not envisioning having 8 kids, for example, but I think that there are ways that we do accomplish those things. It's just maybe through slightly different means. Sometimes I think we're not giving ourselves, and I don't think we're giving God enough credit for working out some of the things in our heart that were really there, because it ends up functionally looking and sounding a little bit different than the expectation. But the actual thing in and of itself that we carried as a seed that we really were passionate about, well, actually, that does happen if we're willing to release a little bit the mechanics of how it all goes down.
Yeah, I think that's one of the keys, right? Is to surrender, obviously, to God, but also, to the control over. Now you have to move and you have to act and you have to do the things, but to release control and to surrender to God and kind of let Him move in your life. And I think that is a lesson that's so hard to learn. I know I didn't learn that till I was in my mid 30s, but it sounds like you learned that a lot sooner. And
Oh, I
how
don't
did
know about that.
no? Well, that's okay because I mean, look at you now. So I would love for you to tell, the listeners what it is that you do, what kinds of like as a mom, as a wife, and I know you've also worked in industries that are mainly male dominated. So of course, as I work with men, I want to talk about that eventually too. So yeah, just ever since elementary school and those things, like then what happened?
And then what happened? Well, my dad was a rocket scientist and he was with the space shuttle program. So I was actually born in Alabama at Marshall Space Center. If you're familiar with the rocket industry at all, that's one of the big meccas for being able to work on different systems and that kind of thing. And my dad had this really great ability where he was very technically minded. His advanced degrees were in engineering, but he was also able to communicate that really well to those people who were then signing contracts for all of this technology and that kind of thing. So he was able to really go back and forth between decision makers for purchasing all this stuff and the guys in the labs and out in the field actually developing all this stuff. And so he ended
Okay.
up moving into management. And when that happened, that meant that we left Alabama when I was pretty young and moved outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then we went out to California because we lived near Edwards Air Force Base. And this was the big hub of all the shuttle development, and it's where the space shuttle would land. If you've ever seen those pictures of the space shuttle landing after a mission and they're out in the desert, that was where I was living.
That
So
is so
that's why we were
cool.
out there. Yeah. And
Okay.
we were very close to JPL, which is in Pasadena, which is a big part of all of the aeronautical world as well. Then my dad was again promoted, and we ended up going to Washington, D.C., and then to Utah because the Bonneville salt flats are there. And so this was another area where they could go and test things and all of that. And then I ended up down in Texas going to college.
Okay.
And it was from there that I began to have some doors open that I hadn't actually imagined. Originally, when I went to college, I was going to be a psychologist. I was going to have my own personal practice, and I was going to get back to California as quickly as possible because the
What'd you say?
majority of my childhood and into my early high school years was spent in California. And so I just wanted to get back as fast as I possibly could. And so I was finishing up my undergrad and I was on a fast track because, I had things to do. I had grad school to get to in California.
Yeah.
And then I met this guy and he was kind of a compelling guy and he was a very interesting guy and he had perfect teeth and he had really gorgeous blue eyes. And we hit it off and it was a friendship. He was the it guy on campus. He was dating the it girl on campus. And I was just the nerdy girl who was fast tracking a degree and trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. And then a little romance struck.
Mhm.
He and this girl broke up, and there was kind of a little window of opportunity. But even in that, I didn't know exactly. I knew how I felt about him. I was very clear about that. But I didn't know if that was exactly what he was thinking. And
Okay.
we were young. And in the middle of all this, I was giving a presentation in a class and this guy approached me. This was over a summer semester. And so the population in these classes was a little bit more varied during the summers
Okay.
because you would have people in business and industry who would come in and take, a shortened semester of a class or whatever. And I gave this presentation and this guy approached me and he said, "There's just something about your voice." And I was like, "Pfft, he just wants to ask me out, this
Yeah.
random guy." And he said, "Well, actually," and it turned out that he legitimately was the manager of a radio station. And he
Oh,
said, "I really
wow.
do want you to come in and do a voice test." And I thought, this is so random, but okay, sure. But I
Yeah.
went in and he actually was, and I voice tested again. not really having that on the radar, and it went really well, and they hired me, and then they very quickly moved me into a morning show position, and from there, because of some connections I had with them, I was asked to come and screen test for a news station television, and I did that and got that position. And so for a period of time, I was on this morning show at the radio station. Then I'd go tearing across town and get over to the television station and be there till the wee hours of the night. And what I
That's
began to
incredible.
realize, it was really interesting. And this is why I am passionate when we talked about, what did fourth and fifth grade Julie want to do versus how did God end up arranging the pieces? My degree path was in psychology, a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, which is a pre-med degree, and then also a Bachelor of Arts in Literature, because I just loved words. I loved to read. I
Yeah.
loved to write. And what I realized was that journalism in many ways was this fantastic crossover of those two things, because psychology was a lot about knowing how to ask the questions that really get to the core of something, right?
Right.
And the literature degree was being able to write all that up in a way that would hold a reader's or a viewer's or a listener's attention. And so I watched God in a very interesting way open up something for me that I just had not expected. It
Yeah.
ended up really being the launch pad for a lot of what has followed since. Now, that other guy, the one with the perfect
Yes.
and the sparkling eyes and all
Perfect fit
that,
guy.
yeah, that guy, we ended up indeed going into a full-on romance and got engaged and got married after a couple of years of dating. And I have to tell you, we had like this beautiful 10-year plan for how everything was going to look. He wasn't sure he ever wanted kids. He wanted to travel. He was working for a couple of different US senators. He was headed to law school. There was a whole lot going on.
Mhm.
And I was getting more and more offers to get to do more and more in broadcast. And I was, really excited about a lot of those things. We got married, and we'd been married about 6 months, and we discovered we were expecting. And
Yeah.
this was a real shocker. I mean, this was not
I can
the direction
imagine.
that we thought things were going to go. And the other shocker that came with it was I was very driven, and I did have some really cool opportunities in front of me. And I became very convinced early on, hey, I want to really be able to be present for this baby. And
Yeah.
I already knew the toll that the radio and television career that I had built, I already knew what it was taking in general. I mean, it is an exhausting field. And it's important to remember that this was all taking place before we had social media platforms, before being able to broadcast yourself any way you wanted on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever, before we had
Yeah.
democratized access, right? So there was just this very narrow lane for you to be able to be in it. But because of that, so much was expected of you.
So much
And
pressure, huh?
yeah, your life was not your own. And so I knew that some changes were going to have to come.
Yeah.
And they did. Good ones, but definitely
Right.
ones that we had not anticipated.
Yeah.
And through all
Especially
that,
coming from him who said he originally didn't want children, and
yeah,
n
yeah.
spoiler alert, we know that you have 8.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, there were some adjustments of opinion in there, definitely. He really fell in love with that first baby, and for a guy who had not necessarily pictured himself being a dad, and particularly a dad at a young age, young and developing our careers and everything else, he was just so crazy about her, and that
Oh,
really paved the way to be a little more, well, I wonder what else, what other surprises God might bring, and what else maybe we need to be open to, that we think we've got this plan in place. But maybe there are things that we need to soften a bit and ask God where he's leading, or be looking for
yeah.
the doors he's opening instead of all the ways we were trying to kick down doors at that time.
Yeah.
So,
So during that time, I'm just curious, like, as a couple, as a young married couple with your first child, 2 questions actually. Were you both actively asking those questions amongst yourselves and also with God? Like, were you spiritually, connected in that way with God at that young age as a married couple?
right. I think that we had some of that going on for sure. We were both strong believers, and I think we both had a sense that we were really wanting to follow God. But a lot of follow God at that time in our lives, I think, meant more to us in terms of lifestyle choices we made and things like that. Following the rules, I guess,
Yeah.
is what I would say. And over time, what I think we both went on a path of was learning that following God isn't just about trying to accomplish a set of lifestyle rules. It may also include that, but there's more to it than that. Part of what was interesting in all of this too is definitely the era in which we were finishing up our degrees, coming into our careers, and really starting to launch had a lot of self determinism in it, if you will. So
Okay.
you were to set the goal, you were to achieve the goal. There would be no excuses. It would be all grit, and God would bless that effort, if that
Got
makes
it.
sense.
Yep.
So one of the places that actually for us became a place that we went, we did move more into a practice of, should we take this job or that one? Should we move this direction or not? Should we buy this house or wait a little bit longer? I feel like we really began to more prayerfully look at some of those decisions.
Yeah.
But one of the last holdouts, frankly, was on family. It sort of never occurred to us, should we pray about family size and kids? And
Yeah.
again, I'm not trying to be prescriptive and say everybody should have as many kids as possible. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it was something that we had not really prayerfully talked about with God. It was
Okay.
something that if people had asked us, Mike would say, I'm not sure that I want any. And I would say, well, I think I could probably do three. I'm one of three kids. That was kind of the way that we had that conversation.
Right.
And then there are all these practicums too that we would talk about, because there are realities to big family life, or one kid or two kids or four kids. And that is, how are we going to pay for this? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of energy, what kind of time, what does this look like? There are very practical aspects to
Kind of
having a
vehicle.
family in general, or a puppy, that I think sometimes we don't even stop and think about, or we do think about to the point that we talk ourselves out of some things. But I don't know that we often engage as prayerfully as maybe we could, what it would mean if we would let God direct us a little bit more on that. And I just want to step there very tenderly, because I think sometimes we immediately want to jump to a formula, right? Oh, so
Right.
everyone should XYZ. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there was a posture that we developed over time that was interesting, saying, we might feel full up or a little overwhelmed or stretched a little too thin, but let's pray about this and
Yeah.
see what's laid on our hearts.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think praying about every area of your life, praying specifically, because God will give you answers in very specific ways. I mean, He tells us to pray in a detailed way and pray as often as possible, right? So there is a rhyme and reason to that, and I think a lot of people, life gets busy, right? And we may stay connected to God, we may pray every day, but are we really praying in a deep way that, first of all, brings our relationship with God to increasingly higher levels, but also praying for the specific things and crying out to Him in the ways that we are supposed to? I think sometimes praying can become a, you know, a routine or a chore of some sort if we're not very careful. Especially maybe in those younger days when people are more um, aligned with, like, how can I make my career the best one possible, and who can I marry, and it's really hard, I think, to, again, like I was saying, let go and kind of let God guide you.
Right, right. It
Um,
is. It's tricky.
yeah. So okay. So after the first baby, did you have to significantly alter what you were doing professionally?
It was a big switch initially. And the part of the switch that was very interesting was I went from going to the grocery store and being recognized and people stopping me and that kind of thing, to moving to a new city and being anonymous to some degree. And that very quiet life of doing some things behind the scenes, continuing to do some various work behind the scenes, but for the most part, living day to day, taking care of this kiddo, which I loved. I was absolutely crazy about her. I loved that role, but it was a big switch because it was going from a much more public facing situation to one that was not that at all. And so that was a big change over time, but it was interesting because once again, opportunities in broadcast just started showing up, even though it was not something, again, this was before you could promote yourself on social media and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And I was not out there gen networking at all, but it was interesting because once again, some doors started to open up and I started doing a lot more commercial voiceover work and on camera commercial work, that type thing. And found myself getting to still traffic in some of that arena, which was really great, but then also not being in a place where I was needing to be at a television station from dawn until midnight. It
Yeah.
was really nice to be able to keep dabbling in it. And at that point, I started to do a lot more freelance projects. Now, what's funny about that, and I don't know if this is again, this is before we saw a lot more serial entrepreneurialism like we do today. It was very hard for me to really see that as an opportunity, that this was a real business that I was developing.
Okay.
It's kind of funny looking back because it seemed more like this little silly thing I was doing on the side for, as my grandmother would call it, pin money.
Okay.
And yet now, one thing that I love in today's environment is we have men and women who are beginning to do gig work and do more freelance stuff and develop different agencies that help fill in the gaps as vendors for various businesses. And it's
Right.
all that kind of stuff. It's all those little places where you can slot in and help provide a service. And I look back now and I'm like, well, look at her. Like,
Yeah.
she was running this little media company and she didn't even really know it. Like, because
You were way ahead of the game. And, it seems like something that would be, that's what people would want to create now. But that would be, I would assume that would have been a more scary, unpredictable, what am I really doing kind of thing back then.
it really was. And I think there was a lot more validity to putting on, the women's business suit and leaving at X time in the morning and carrying the briefcase and going through the doors at 8 a.m. And like, that was a real job. And that was
Yeah.
a real career. And the way that I was sort of out here just improving these different things and picking up different clients, I wouldn't have even called them clients at the time, which is
Yeah.
hilarious. And yet I had a whole little bank of them that I was working for, that I was on retainer with. I mean, this went on for quite a while. And again, I look back a little bit and wonder and think, that is so funny. The internal
Yeah.
dialogue I was having, that I wasn't marking this as something that was real, that,
Yeah.
was compiling an experience and compiling in its ability to be able to serve. And so I do have to laugh when I look back, and I want to encourage people to not diminish what they're doing, even if it feels like it's smaller than maybe what you used to do, or it's not being on the evening news every night, but
Yeah.
it is a legitimate thing that you're providing to help someone else get the word out about their product or their message. So yeah, that's kind of funny looking back.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. I think maybe you have some experience with this, maybe you don't, but I know for myself as a woman and kind of like listening to you talk about that, it is easier for us as women maybe to feel small in this world and, you know, to give ourselves more credit because we are doing amazing things and, I'm not your typical woman hear me roar type person. But, I think what you were doing is amazing, and, I think it's very important to have people around you, like, I'm sure your husband was able to consistently encourage you and lift you up and support you in this and make you feel like you were doing something really important.
And I think one thing that is interesting to also consider in all of this is that it's important that, yes, it's fantastic if you have a spouse who is supportive and cheering you on in these moments. And there's something really important too about being that good friend to yourself, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
because there were times that I would diminish. We still laugh sometimes at the dynamics today because if my husband's on a business call, our young adult children would not interrupt him. If I'm on a business call, they're going to open the office door and go, and they're going to like send me signals and hold up messages. Like, it's just, it
Yeah.
is something funny that we do that. And believe me, it's not that anybody is trying to be, misogynistic over here. That's not what's going on. There's just something that's sort of embedded sometimes, that sometimes we can see one person's efforts is more valid than another's. And so I think there is that place that it's important for us to say, hey, this is a real thing too. It's a mistake that I made early on because I wasn't really clocking it that way myself. And so then I wasn't also clocking it that way for others. And I
Mhm.
sometimes wasn't protecting time the way I needed to help me serve and show up the best in other arenas. So I think that there's
Yeah,
something to that, that we do need that external encouragement. I think that's important. It certainly makes life a lot easier if you have it.
sure.
But there's something internal as well, that if God is bringing you an opportunity, that's a God-given opportunity to steward. That's
Mhm.
important. And it's just as important at what he gives someone else to steward and to grow.
Right.
And so to work in cooperation with God, to not diminish the blessing of opportunity he gives you is, oh, it's just my little thing I'm doing, or it's just a little,
Yeah.
to really say, hey, God's called me to do this thing, whatever it is in scope, in economics, in time, whatever, it still really matters. And there is a respect and a stewardship that should be built around it. That's something I didn't do well in the beginning, that even today I'm still learning to do a little bit better on.
I think that's the goal though, is we should never get to a point where we totally get it and we, can't grow anymore. So I
Yeah,
think consistently growing in that way and, back again to the whole, you know, if you're open to hearing God and what he has for you, because you also have to be open to hear him
right,
and know that those opportunities are from him. And I think, a lot of discernment comes into play as well. Um, perhaps you struggled with that as well. I think I would, I have always been, I would say I have been a person who it's hard for me to make decisions like that. But until I became fully um, secure in who I am in God, then the decisions become easier. Like,
right.
and still sometimes it's hard, and you really have to pray and exercise some pretty good, discernment, which is always a hard thing for me as a toxic past people pleaser. Um, but being open to those opportunities that you can allow him to put you on this path and just watch your life change. I mean, even what I know about your story so far is like, the elementary school piece, the radio, the TV, like, and then like you can just see how he's orchestrated everything. And it's so beautiful.
Right. But you don't always have the full picture in your mind when you're in the midst of it. And
Right.
I think it's easy to, like I said, diminish certain things that you have no idea are going to be the pathway through which he opens up something much bigger. Or
Mhm.
if it's not working it out, like the thing you wrote down, if it's not working out exactly the pathway that you have envisioned other people took, or according to the template that that so and so was so successful and they did A, B, C, and D, and you're trying to do A, B, C, and D, and instead it's feeling like G, K, T, X. It's just not the
Yeah,
same thing. And we can start doubting that he's still in the middle of it with us and orchestrating these things. And I think that's one of the reasons we see in scripture where it talks about, don't despise the day of small beginnings. And yet so often I think we're very quick to do that. And I think as women, when we begin to say, well, wait a minute. I mean, this may be a little small beginning, but it's important. But then sometimes the message we get is, well, now you're being selfish. Aren't you supposed to be living for other people? Aren't you supposed to
yeah,
be giving of yourself? Aren't you supposed to be? And those things are true. We are to be generous at heart. We are to be interruptible. I think that's really important.
sure.
But I don't think typically, at least with a lot of the women I know, a lot of the women business leaders I know, I don't think our problem is that we're not interruptible. I don't think our problem is that we're not willing to serve, is that sometimes we allow those things in a magnitude that I don't necessarily think is what God really intended to overwhelm the very good thing he's wanting to do in us and give us and provide for us, because we're dealing with toxic people pleasing. We're dealing with
Yep,
shame messaging. We're dealing with a lot of competing ideas about who women are supposed to be today and what it's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to look like in relationship to the men in our lives. I find typically women are more guilty of diminishing and being selfless to a point that weirdly becomes kind of selfish because we're so burned out by all of it. And so
exactly.
there's something in that mix that getting the quantities right, I don't have a magic alchemy for that.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to encourage ourselves, to encourage other women. Hey, that thing that you're calling small, it's still important.
I think that's incredibly important. And if you think about the Proverbs 31 woman, yes, she was a great wife, but she was also an entrepreneur and
Mhm.
she was a bold leader who was full of wisdom. And, that's who we're called to be as women. Is
Right.
yes, we're supposed to be a nurturing, loving wife and mom, but we're supposed to also be those other things.
Right.
And I think sometimes that gets, whether it's because of fear or, you know, Satan in our ear whispering all the things that he whispers about our own self-doubt and self-hate and shame, it's important to really listen and follow your calling and know that the things, like you said, don't diminish the things that you're doing. If you feel called to do something, as scary as that may seem sometimes, to go out and do it
Right. Right.
and keep doing it and let it and watch it evolve.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the same place that we sometimes all work very hard to clear the decks for the people in our lives that we love so that they can chase things that they want to do and things they feel called to do, we also need that clearing of the decks sometimes for ourselves. And I find sometimes it's very hard for us as women to give ourselves permission to do that. So the very things that we would take out of the way of someone we loved because we know it might be a distraction or a way that we would serve in order so that someone can chase whatever that dream is. Well, we also need that. And I think,
Yeah,
I do think we multitask at a really amazing level. And I think it's amazing that we can do that and all those things. But it's also okay to say, I'm going to need a minute here to really focus and to steward well this thing that God has asked me to do.
totally. Totally. All right. So take me back to your story. So you've kind of, you started doing things on a different scale, um, more in the background than you were used to. You have so how do you get to 8 kids and how do and I know something else is that you have struggled with some special needs and I have too, and so I would like to get into that too. So
Yeah.
yeah, so tell me what happens next.
So this work in the background is still happening, and then somewhere in there, I have a photography business I start, and there's media
Oh,
stuff going
okay.
on. Yeah, there's media stuff going
Right.
on in the background, but the primary feature is obviously this path to having more children and becoming a little more open in that way, and we are kind of cooking along, and my husband's career is doing its thing, and I've got these things I'm doing on the side, and we're patching this all together. We're figuring it
Mhm.
out. And we are pregnant with our fifth child, and our fourth child is having some developmental delays that we're trying to figure out. And this, of course, because sometimes life is just like this, right? I'm pregnant with the fifth. My husband has a situation arise where he's going to need to make a big shift in his career into a different group. He's going to have to shift companies. And it was not one of these situations which was like, oh, this is so exciting. This is the next big step. It was because there was a real lack of integrity on the part of someone. And so we were
Okay.
having to grapple with that. And we were now going to have to shift into something different. And this was going to be big and it was going to take a lot of work. And in the middle of all this, literally on the weekend, this is all happening, like this little period of time that we are doing all the stuff that has to be done over here and trying to make the move over into here and on and on. And I'm huge pregnant. We have this little follow up for my daughter who was having some challenges. It was supposed to just be a very routine ear check. And we discover in this test that she has significant hearing loss. And this completely changes, just really shifts what's going on, because now we are thrown into needing to make a lot of decisions for her and very expensive decisions for her very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And this is a whole new world for us. So God really carried us in that time. There was so much that was unknown with what was happening with my husband's career, tons and tons of stress, trying to onboard this new information. We still had the same kid. I loved what the
Yeah.
gal who did the testing with us told me. She said, you still have the very same child. You just know a little bit more about her now. And I've
Mhm.
always thought that was such a beautiful way of expressing that. But
That
we
is.
were, yeah, it was great. But we were on a steep uphill climb in terms of just onboarding all of this information. We didn't have anyone else in the family who had this type of hearing loss and this kind of experience, and on and on and on. We went on to have that fifth pregnancy, had that baby, and then had another baby after that. We were living in a town where my husband had grown up. He had great connections. His mom and dad were there. My parents were in the process of moving there. I had convinced a brother of mine to move there, and he had started his family there. My husband's sister had moved there. It was
Nice.
exactly where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Honestly, I loved, because I had not grown up around extended family. I desperately wanted that for my kids and that
Yeah.
experience. And then my husband had an opportunity come up about 12 hours on a good day drive from this particular city. And we really, that was tough, because from pure numbers and from pure opportunity, it made sense to do it. For
Okay.
all kinds of interpersonal reasons, it made no sense at all. We had finally figured out the right therapy modalities for my daughter. I knew who all the best of the best were in our region. I was leaning and hanging on hard to that team of people who were helping with this child's therapeutic process. I had really deep, just such devoted friends. I had family. It was really, really weighty. And
Yeah.
even in that, I think sometimes we think that when we come up to a decision and we're praying about what to do, sometimes I think, just roll with me here.
Okay.
Mike and I've talked a lot about this, that I think sometimes God says, you choose. I'm going to be with you either way.
Okay.
But often I think in our theology, we think God's going to highlight, like a magic 8 ball, the one way. So
Yep.
when we first approached this decision, I think we were really looking for God to spotlight exactly which path was the right one, instead of approaching it from a perspective of God's going to bless what we decide. I mean,
Right.
there will be ramifications both sides, whatever we decide, but he's going to be with us either side. We instead were treating it more like it's the lottery and you got to pick door A or door B. And if you pick the wrong door, you've messed up everything forever.
Right.
And so he ended up taking the position. And according to that idea of, if you pick the right door, everything's going to light up, you would have thought that the house would have sold immediately, that we would have immediately been able to go down and build new community, and it would have been sunshine and roses and puppies and all kinds of things. And it wasn't. It was so hard. So many things did not line up. Now,
Okay.
would there have been hard if we had stayed where we were? There were some ramifications career-wise. There were some things that were going on that could have made that path more difficult in certain ways. But over time, finally got the other house sold. Took like a year before we were really back together as a family.
Oh,
It was
how hard is that?
really, really challenging. It was really
Yeah.
challenging. And so we started to get somewhat settled in this new city, and started talking again about our really bringing before God, was our family complete or not, or I don't know, or what do you think? And we got pregnant again.
Okay.
And then we discovered it was twins, which was an absolute shock.
Yeah. That is.
So now we're on baby 7 and 8. And by this
Yeah.
point, we are older parents. We are no longer, the young marrieds, some of the first of the group to get pregnant with their first baby. No. All those friends, they were long done. We are now off in a range by ourselves. And there's such a mean term when you're pregnant at that age, because it's like, oh, you're a senile multi-graviparma. I don't even know.
Oh my
There's
gosh,
like
yes.
I'm like, wait,
Yes.
hey. So we were now pregnant with the twins. And then Mike gets another opportunity for us to move to Austin. So we moved to Austin, Texas 5 weeks before I had our twins,
Oh,
which was
wow.
a whole party, because,
That is stressful.
that was a whole thing. And so those moments are so interesting, because again, if we go back to the fourth grade, fifth grade, who do you want to be? What do you want to be when you grow up? I think we often, even in the writing down of our goals, don't always grasp that sometimes we are in a position where God's going to give us some autonomy in choice. And it's not to punk us. It's not to pull the rug out from underneath us. It's just life. And sometimes you can make the absolute right decision, but the start is hard. And
Yeah.
sometimes you can make a decision that looking back, you're like, I wouldn't make that choice again. But it feels like the whole thing is like so easy. Like, oh,
Mhm.
for sure. Oh, look how God's blessing this.
Definitely.
This is all just falling right in line. And we take that as evidence that this was the thing he wanted us to do, instead of looking at more of it like God's always with us. Even when we make the wrong decision, he's
Right.
always with us. And so I think there was something in all of those choices and decisions that we were making that was really interesting. But the wild thing, whether we were ever supposed to leave the city we were in, whether Mike was supposed to take that other position or not, and all the different challenges that we were facing, one thing that was amazing when we got to Austin was that there were more doors that started opening and more people that it just really felt like,
Okay.
whoa, over time. This was not immediately evident. I mean, when those babies were born, I got to tell you, I spent the first probably year going from this house to Costco and back again. That was just about it. That was about all
Yeah.
that was happening. And we also had during that period of time the medical discovery that one of our twins has cerebral palsy. So that was a whole other experience and learning about her condition, her situation, once again trying to put together the right team for her, all of those things. But
Right.
in the midst of that, as an outlet, because I was only going from house to Costco to house, sometimes Target if I was feeling wild, I was needing some kind of outlet. I had continued doing different things in media, and even through the move we had made to this other city. And then once we got to Austin, and this is when blogging was just really starting to kick off. I
Okay.
once again did not see blogging necessarily as a business. I
Right.
thought this is an outlet. This is an online journal. This is a way for me to share what it's like to be in a new city with 8 children in, this era in history when most American families don't have that amount of kids, and you don't have a woman who is still interested in career and business and all those things, having that
Right.
many
That's a really great
children,
concept.
and so I started blogging, and it just so happened that there were some women who started reading that blog who we all went to the same church. They happened to be on staff. They brought it to the attention of the senior pastor, and we started dialoguing about me doing more teaching and speaking, and it kind of turned into a whole thing. So once again, this moment where I thought, well, I'm doing this little thing on the side,
Right.
and it started building into something more. And
Wow.
so that's how we got to Austin. That's how we got to 8 kids. That kind of gets you somewhat caught up. There's still a lot of years, tears, learning, all kinds of stuff in
Yeah.
that and today. But
Yeah. That's really, really incredible. So throughout all of those, you guys went through some incredibly challenging decisions. And, just like anytime you step out into uncertainty, that's really scary. But trusting God and again, looking for those opportunities that he gives you as you continue following, each step you take with him. Because maybe if you weren't following God, you wouldn't have seen that opportunity that you just described at the
right,
church. Like maybe you wouldn't have seen that happen if you're not
right.
following God. So I think, yes, to your point, he will always be with you in whatever decision you do make, even if, because I always hear, I think we do want the spotlight to show us the answer.
Mhm.
But I think you're right. And it's not really something I've ever really thought about, but there can be 2 fine ways to go.
Yeah.
And can you bring glory to God in both ways? Okay, then pick one and let's do it. I think that's really hard for people, but that's amazing that following God, listening to him as he brought you along in all the steps that you guys have taken. Um, with the with your how old are your twins now?
They are 19. Yeah. Young
That's
adults.
incredible.
Yeah. It's
And
crazy.
so how are all the kids doing? And what did I mean, I'm sure the obvious question is, what have you learned as a mom and a wife, being a mom to 8 children, because that is something that's rare.
Yeah, it is. I One of the things I love, now listen, I'm the daughter of a rocket scientist. I love
Yeah.
efficiency. I love systems. I love all that kind of stuff. I love replicable results. I think all of that is important. I love how kids smash through every bit of that. You think you've got something figured out. And this is one thing I think is really important for business leaders today. I've worked with some business leaders who everything is on the fly. That's not good. Like,
Mhm.
there is a level of being able to say, this is what we operate by, this is why, and being able to truly inculcate that into a business. I think that is so important.
Yes.
It also rides alongside all these individual personalities that you deal with. And so, truly, to many degrees, while there are different implications, running a large family is like running a large company.
Mhm.
You are constantly in the business of HR. You are constantly in the business of managing how each of these temperaments comes to be and sort of what the pecking order and the dynamics are and all of those kinds of things. If you are always operating by chaos, it's going to feel like even more chaos with your people.
Mhm.
If you have some ways that you're really dialed in and you're clear about how you're going to do some certain things, then it allows you to really celebrate and enjoy all the complexities and layers and personalities that you have within this team, within,
Yeah.
in my case, a lot of kids in the family. And
Right.
it actually led to my first book, which is called Raising an Original, which is about exploring the really unique ways God weaves each of us together. It's an exploration of personality style. It's understanding the personality styles of your children. It's understanding your personality style as a parent. We show up in different roles with certain aspects of our personality a little more on point than in others. Obviously, there are aspects of our personality in our romantic relationship that come to the forefront that are going to
Mhm.
be different than our relationship with our best friend or our
Yeah.
relationship with our boss or whatever. So it's not that I'm saying you don't have consistencies in your personality. You do, but you have different aspects that are strengths depending on the role that you're in at the time. And your
Mhm.
children have very discernible personality traits. We know this to some degree, but a lot of times we're trying to parent by a system and make the kid fit the system. Now, I know I
Exactly.
sound like I'm saying something hypocritical here. I'm not saying that, you having a system by which you're thinking about your life and running your home shouldn't be there. It should be, but it has to accommodate for the personalities in your home. And I've seen people get like super granular on routines and some things like that, thinking that that's parenting when they clearly have a kid who does not fit well in that. And it just becomes conflict and challenge all over again. As someone who is raising a family, my job is to uncover and celebrate and then help steward well and help coach well what God put into this kid,
Right.
not make them reset to factory settings on what I think they should do and how they should fulfill my mission. And so there's a lot there in terms of raising all these kids that has had to do with really releasing and relearning some things. I've watched a whole lot of waves of parenting trends come through in the arc of all of these kids
Yeah.
because I've been parenting a very long time. I mean, I have generations, right, of children who were born in different pockets of
Right.
different generations, which is very interesting. And and I understand why there are a lot of people now who look back at some of the parenting styles when we had our first baby, and they will call out all of the problems and toxicities and things that were wrong with that style. And I'm like, yeah,
Sure.
valid. And get ready, because the one y'all all think is the big hot thing now that is how it should be done. Those babies in 20 years are going to be pointing back and going, look at the toxicity of da 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 parenting. And
Yes.
I'm laughing. I'm like, yeah, get
Yes.
ready, buckle
That is
up.
so true.
Yeah.
So true.
And so there's something really profound about if we kind of just toss all that to the side and go, who has God entrusted me with? Really? Not my vision, not who I think kids should be, or I never had the chance to do XYZ. So I want this kid to go do it. No, no, no. who has God really entrusted you with in your home? And how are you willingly, obediently going to steward that well? You know, some of the easy ones to point out, you have a dad who never got to realize his athletic dreams. So he's going to make his kid be the star basketball player.
Right.
Cut it out. You
Yeah.
don't know that. That may not be at all the mission God has on that kid's life. The mom who feels like she wasn't cute enough or thin enough or popular enough or whatever. So she's going to make for sure that her daughter is all those things, is going to be the
Yes.
homecoming queen. No, she's not. You got to back off. And I'm not saying we don't have dreams and visions for our kids. I'm not saying that. But there is a level to which when we're willing to sacrifice the kid on the altar of what we wish could be, we're going to run into a lot of trouble. And whether that's within family or within business constructs or within congregations, there's a whole lot of that. There is a profound respect that comes from really looking at someone and saying, here is another prism, another aspect, another layer of an element of God. You know, God says that we are created in his image. That doesn't mean just me. It means all of these humans that I interact with, even when they do things really differently or see things differently from the perspective that I would consider it through. I'm learning about yet another facet of God if I'm willing to look at it that way. And so, yeah, that's a little snapshot of parenting.
Yeah, I think that's really excellent advice. Because everybody's made so differently, right? And everybody, you know, I've struggled with this as a parent myself, especially with my middle child. I like to be in control. I'm type A when it comes to parenting, and I have all these things like you just said, like I want this to be true, and I want this to be true, and I want this to be true. But the fact is, like, I was trying to force her to be something that she is not.
Yeah.
And when I let go of that and kind of sacrificed her to God to be her father and not me, that's when things have improved significantly. It's like you have to parent each child differently, just like you do in the workplace,
Of
right?
course,
That's why
of
they have all
course.
the assessments that they do. You know, if you're working with, you know, let's take the DISC assessment, for instance. Like if you have a D child or if you have an S child, like you're going to communicate with them in completely different ways, and they're gonna want different structure. So yeah, it's the same in your marriage. It's the same in your household. It's the same in your company.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
you have to be a student of the people in your life.
And you have to be humble enough to be that student. I think that's one of the places that we can really struggle because we do have life experience. We do have things to share. We do have some cautionary tales that we're like, please don't make yourself go through XYZ, you know, listen to me. But
Yes.
there is a humility in truly being willing to let someone show you who they are and to see how you can serve that person for exactly who they are.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. So in our few minutes that we have left, I just want to hit like one question that I really wanted to get your thoughts on. Okay, so I know that you have worked in a lot of male dominated industries, areas. What did you learn about that? I'm
Oh,
very
yeah.
fascinated, you know,
I
in
love
that.
that. I mean, the reality is I have two younger brothers who I am crazy about, two of my very best friends. And I adore them. I have three sons, married to my husband, Mike, for quite a while now. I've always really loved men, adored my dad. So I ended up in industries that were often male dominated, not because I was thinking that was what I was going to do. It's just that a lot of media at that time absolutely was. I mean, men ran that world. And then also in ministry. You know, there were many times I would be in a conference room, I would be the only woman. And
Yeah.
that still happens today. I walk into boardrooms to advise senior leaders and thought leaders, and there are a lot of times I am the first female who has spoken into that space, even today.
Yeah.
A couple of things that I really note about that. There are some things in that world that I really appreciate that I simply operate a little bit better in. I think sometimes I was a women's pastor for a long time, and there were times that I would laugh and I was like, I think I do better as the men's pastor. But
I can relate for sure.
and I don't
I
mean
can
that in
relate.
any kind of like, you know, weird way. I just mean like sometimes I'd be going, I'm kind of not wired this way. I understand more of the dynamics of this way.
Mhm.
But I think there's some things that have also been very interesting that can sneak up on us if we're not thoughtful. And I think they can be very embedded in culture. And I certainly noticed this in my work. And again, very much a fan of a lot of the guys I worked with, some of the best people I know. I mean, like I've had such a good experience in many, many ways.
Yeah.
But I always want to challenge people in both marriage and in business. There's a very real phenomenon called the gender credibility gap that when you look
Okay.
at the statistics around this, I can look back over the course of my career and see it in spades, even with men who I truly admire and really like, that this was sneaking in. And the gender credibility gap is this, and you can just go look at the data. This is not an emotional conversation. It is data driven. The reality is we tend in our culture to believe men and disbelieve women first. And then sometimes we move this way. And maybe we come to the place where we believe a woman and we come to disbelieve a man, but we start here.
Mm.
You can see it in a lot of studies of juries, for example. A jury will start out and they will believe that the male witness is more credible than the female witness, even if they're telling the very same story. There
Yeah.
was a fascinating study that was done, psych study that was done. It was an online course, and half of the class believed that it was a male professor as the professor, and half of the class believed it was a female professor. And when they surveyed the class afterwards, those who thought that the professor was male found him to be one of the best professors. They really liked him the very best. They thought he was, much more proficient in the way he said things, and on and on and on. And those who believed it was the female, the professor was female, graded that experience as lesser. So this is
That is
happening. Yeah,
fascinating.
it is a fascinating thing to dig into. And the reason I bring it up is because I've been surrounded by such good men who would never think they were misogynistic. And I don't think in their hearts or in their intention they're misogynistic. It's
Right.
what I call an accidental misogyny. We have these currents and dynamics and things that are working underneath that we don't even realize are afoot. I had times I would need to go to a senior leader about a challenge with, say, a female in the organization. And because I'm female and I was bringing it to him about another female, the response would be, yeah, girls are like that, just cat fighting and da, da, da. And I would go, I've seen men bring similar conflict or organizational issues about another man to senior leadership and have it
Mhm.
seen taken very seriously. But me
Right.
showing up as a female about another female is somehow just some kind of, we're just over going, which was not the case. That was not the issue. And so I think there are ways that when godly men are willing to say, yeah, that's the data, that's the psychological fact. How can I do that self-check to make sure I'm not defaulting to it?
Mhm.
Is really important in the construct of our families, in the construct of our congregations, in the construct of our companies. Because when you already unconsciously are self-selecting half of your population as, well, they're going to need to prove it to me,
Yeah.
versus, oh yeah, they're authoritative, they're coming in, I can. And, one of the things I love is that I see Jesus actually tackle this head on. Who does he appear first to after the resurrection? Women. And what
Women.
immediately happens? The apostles are like, yeah, no. Now, again, I got to give them some credit. To hear that your leader has come back to life is asking a lot. I mean, I
Sure.
understand, but I
Sure.
do think he's highlighting. I mean, immediately they're discounted as hysterical, as not reliable witnesses on all the things we see in a gender credibility gap. And so there's something really profound there that within leadership, within men being their best selves, just acknowledge that this is the research, this is the science, and to be doing that self-check to say, I want to make sure that I'm not discounting something simply because of someone's gender, that I'm just immediately
Yeah.
going, oh, we'll see. I think that's a really important thing to note. And had I been aware of this in the past in certain settings, I wouldn't have liked it, but I think it would have helped me understand sometimes a response I was getting when I was bringing up a serious issue or a problem or a proposal that if I had had words to put to it, if I'd had research to put to it, it was confusing to
Yeah,
work for really good guys, but then know there was something kind of weird going on. And of course, I'm assuming it's me, or I didn't say it right,
sure.
or I didn't present it right, or I came on too strong, or I didn't come on strong enough. And of course, there are all those lessons. We all need to tweak our communications, but there's also just something to going, yeah, I'm female. And so the likelihood I'm not going to be believed out of the chute is actually statistically a lot higher. That would have been a
Yeah.
helpful thing to have noted, even in really good working situations.
Yeah, that's something that I hope that people can gain in a business sense. Like I work with men and I actually face that every single day. I
Yeah.
probably get 10 or 20 messages per day. Well, what gives you the authority? What gives you the credibility? What gives you this or this to be able to say what you say to men?
Yeah.
And I kind of have to claw my way up from, like you're saying, like from the bottom to gain the credibility and state why and, what my mission is. And they don't, they definitely don't believe me or in me at first.
Right.
Um, and that, yeah, you're right. I never thought about it though, but we do have to prove ourselves.
We do. And when you know that that dynamic is afoot, the thing I love about it is it leaves room to say, hey, I know I'm working with a great guy. It's not about that. It's about some embedded narratives that nobody even realizes are running. It's like when you're
Yeah.
reworking your website and something's wonky and you're having to go through the code, like line by line. And sometimes it's like the tiniest little thing, like a space got skipped or a
Right.
symbol got put in or whatever, but it kind of janks the whole thing just a little, not a whole lot, but
Yeah.
just a little. And I think that knowing that that is in the code is really helpful. And I think it's a way that allows guys, because I get it when guys start feeling defensive, like, I'm not misogynistic. I want women to have opportunities. I want this. I believe them. I do. I
Yeah.
also think there is this thing that runs through that we just have to be mindful of.
Yeah. I think, yeah. So more awareness there. Just like we could talk for hours about all this stuff. I know.
Yeah.
Just like, men need to have all those biblical masculine qualities, but they also need to have a really good level of emotional intelligence and
Mhm.
vulnerability. So it's like all of those things. And I think in order to see women and what we can provide to homes and households and companies, like there has to be that part too, because you have to be willing to um, be open
Right.
to hearing something that might not be what you thought it would be.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I think that's the place where, for all of us, and I see particularly within the way that we have sometimes I think miscast men that is also kind of not fair, is we've wanted guys to become more transparent, more vulnerable. We haven't also taught emotional regulation and things
Right.
like that.
Right.
And so then understandably you've got guys who are going, well, I'm being more vulnerable. I'm talking about my feelings. And now, everybody's still upset or, or whatever the thing is. And again, we tend to do this thing where we start over here and then we flip all the way over here when probably the adjustment needed to be about here.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because there you can be, I think men can be too vulnerable as well.
Right. And so I think that, is another really beautiful way to continue the conversations and make those little adjustments. Sometimes I think we want to tip the culture completely over. And I don't know that that's really what we need to do or what we're talking about. I think it's
Mhm.
in those little small things, just like we've been talking about, all the little small steps that we sometimes diminish or discredit as being really important steps. Sometimes it's the smallest steps, the smallest adjustments, the smallest little thing that we take out of the line of code that can make the biggest difference over the long term if we're willing to really acknowledge the importance of some of those small things.
Yeah, that's excellent. Um, Again, I could make this conversation last another 2 hours. Maybe we'll have to do this again. Um, so 2 last things. In all of the elements of your story, everything that you've experienced, everything that you're still experiencing, evolving towards, moving towards, being called forward to by God, what do you see most? What have you learned about God's character that maybe you didn't know at first?
Wow, I love this question. I think I'm more aware, certainly than I used to be, maybe more aware than ever, of his consistency. But here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
It's a different version of consistency. Um, because if I say, well, I'm just more aware of his presence. Yeah, I do mean that, but I also mean his there-ness, that he is consistently there. I know that sounds super simplistic, but I do
No.
think that throughout the course, when I look at all these things, as we were trying to make certain decisions, as consequences from those decisions were happening, as I was putting up a big goal and I wasn't getting toward it. And there were times that it kind of felt like God's really near. He's really close when I'm getting the results I want, when things are laying out the way I expected. And now things are going rogue. And so I must have done something to move away from him, and he's somewhere over there. And it's my fault. He's true north, and I chose wrong, or I did the wrong thing, or I didn't make the right selection. So now I've got to figure out how to carve my way back over there.
Right.
And now I can look back and see that he was always right there in it. And sometimes the results I was seeing were not diagnostic. They were part of the university course of life. And
Yeah.
we all had those classes in different, assignments and things that were tough or didn't go the way we thought, or we thought we prepared for and we weren't, and on and on and on. It didn't mean that we weren't still in the classroom and the teacher wasn't still right there. And so much of my early life was performance, performance, performance. If I perform correctly, God will be pleased and he will be close. If I don't perform correctly, he will recuse himself from
Oh,
me. So
yeah.
there's something now, and I just really don't have the word, and I'm sorry I don't, but it is like consistency, there-ness, presence, but it's more than that. It's infusion in a sense.
That's a good word.
It's infusion. And I see that more clearly now than I did. And I've released to some degree, still working on it, that it's performance contingent.
Yeah.
I do think what we do matters. I think how we treat people matters. I think our level of integrity matters. I think all those things matter. But I also see that when you belong to God and when his Holy Spirit lives in you, you are infused with him, even when you make the wrong choice, even when you do something dumb.
Yes.
He still is there to claim you as his own. He doesn't
He'll
take
never
the
leave
ring
you.
off. He doesn't take the jersey off. He doesn't have where you're marked on his hands, laser treated, so nobody knows. He is still there. I think that's
Yeah.
probably the thing I see more clearly now.
That is really beautiful. That is really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, God will never leave us, and we don't have to perform in any way because, you know, we don't have to earn his salvation. However, that is part of the sanctification process.
Yeah,
When you are close to God, you do want to do the things that you're supposed to do.
right.
It's something that becomes a desire of yours. But yeah, it's important to know that God will never. That hurts my heart to hear you say that you used to think that he would leave you if you didn't perform a certain way. God will never leave us.
Yeah.
Um, okay, last question. And thank you so much for all of this amazingly good wisdom that you have shared. I know John posted a link to your book in the comments. So
Oh, thank you, John.
yes. First of all, how can people work with you? And then where can they find you?
So today's iteration of business looks like obviously the ghostwriting and collaborative space, but I also do a lot of still other stuff in media. I will show up as your spokesperson. I do voiceover stuff. I write scripting, I do marketing content, and I do consulting, all that kind of stuff. So you can either go to carconsult.agency or you can go to julielylescarr.com. And then, in terms of socials, I am often on Instagram, so people often contact me through my DMs on Instagram. And then I try to check in as I can on LinkedIn. I'm not always the best over here, but I do love the platform and I am over here. So several different ways that you can find me, but those are a couple.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so, so much for having this conversation with me. I have learned a lot for sure, and I guarantee that other people listening have. Thank you so much for being such a steward of your gifts that God gave you, such an amazing mother, wife. I know that you will continue to do great things, and I look forward to watching.
Oh, and to you, friend, love all that you're doing and congratulations. You've built such a beautiful community here. And thank you for letting me get to dabble in it a little bit today. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Well, thank you guys so much for attending, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. God bless.